Okay, so we are in chapter 1, section 3, lesson 2, Eastern and Western Roman Empires. Now, if you know how to access our book, you can skip this part. So you go to lodausd.net, then Clever, and from Clever, launch Cengage Learning, and from Cengage Learning, log in your world history account. It's the same student account that you are using for your Chromebooks. From the left side, Unit 1, Chapter 1, Section 3, Lesson 2, Eastern and Western Roman Empires. So Chapter 1, essential question: what was the power and enduring legacy of the Roman Empire? And for the objective of Lesson 3.2, Eastern and Western Roman Empires, to explain how and why the Roman Empire was divided and administered. So to provide you with additional information besides the information that you have in your book right here, the division of the Roman Empire described in the first section of this lesson happened about 40 years before Constantine came to power. Diocletian did move his administrative capital to the east of Nicomedia, near Constantine's future capital of Byzantium. So Maximian ruled the west, but not from Rome, it's from Milan. So Maximian chose to be in Milan because it was closer to the empire's border, and he could, more quickly respond to attempted Germanic invasion by the barbarians. Diocletian saw his rule as ordained, but by Roman gods, not by the Christian god of Constantine. Although Diocletian found a way to stabilize the empire, it was only a temporary fix, and the succeeding emperors could not copy or emulate. So the main idea of this lesson is in AD 285, the Roman Empire was divided into Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire. So the emperor during this time was Diocletian, and he had a lot of responsibilities. He faced endangered frontiers, overstretched armies, economic collapse, weak imperial authority, and widespread unrest, which was discussed in section 3.1. That was the lesson before this. It is common for kings or emperors to unify different kingdoms so that they can consolidate or somehow create a bigger empire by combining different kingdoms. However, Diocletian's approach is a little bit different. Instead of expanding or making the empire bigger, he divided it into two. So in other words, inasmuch as Diocletian is a proud emperor for sure, he wants to be efficient and effective in governing his people or his empire. So in order to do this, he divided this vast empire into two, the east and the west. He ruled the eastern side of the empire, and he let Maximian rule the Western Roman Empire. So each man appointed a junior emperor or some sort of vice president, and this rule by 4 emperors in total, it is called a Tetrarchy, worked really well at first. So instead of a throne that will rule them all, he divided it into two, and he even encouraged to assign a junior emperor or a vice president, just like what I said, in order to train this young and upcoming ruler of that divided part of the empire. So in order to respond to attacks from different sides of the empire, together they raised their army to about 500,000. And they reorganized and strengthened the frontier forces. They also created a mobile field army ready to tackle trouble whenever it broke out. On the political front, Diocletian and Maximian reformed the government administration and divided the provinces into more manageable units. So to promote unity, they encouraged emperor worship and the Latin language as the official language of the empire. As you know, in the Roman Empire, there are different kinds of religion, and this did not sit well with the Jews and the early Christian during this time, because the Jews and the early Christians, are just worshiping one God. To worship a human being or any created beings, creatures, is definitely considered a sin to these monotheistic religions. So, this practical approach was initially successful. The empire was on the road to recovery, and after 20 years, Diocletian and Maximian retired, letting their junior emperors to take over. However, it was as good as the Tetrarchy got. Now, let's take a look at how the Roman Empire was divided. So, the orange part is the western side, and the eastern side is the purple. And Diocletian's decision to rule the Eastern Roman Empire made it clear that Rome was no longer the center of political power because Rome is in the western side. So Constantinople was created eventually by Constantine, named after him, and it is in the eastern side of the Roman Empire. So initially, the idea was great and successful because of its practicality. But eventually, of course, greed takes over. And these emperors of these two sides, the eastern and the western side of the Roman Empire, desired to consolidate the empire again so that they will be more powerful, not just by ruling one side or one half of the empire, but they want to rule the entire empire just like the emperors in the past. And this led to Rome's war against itself, or civil war. So when Constantine's father died, the Tetrarchy refused his claim to be the Western emperor. This resulted to a civil war. And Constantine eventually won the war, if you still remember the story, and became emperor of the East and West. However, he's not that interested on the western side of the empire. He's more interested in the eastern half of his empire. And because of this, he moved the center or the capital city of the empire from Rome to Constantinople, which is obviously named after him. He continued the reforms begun by earlier emperors, and he was successful. And because of this, he was called the Great, Constantine the Great. However, his sons plunged the empire into another civil war, probably because of jealousy and they want power, they have ego and things like that. So the emperor Theodosius later reunited the empire, but the division of the East and the West became permanent after his death in AD 395. From then on, the fortunes and futures of the two empires were very different. So was this a good thing? Well, eventually only time will tell. History judged them, and the result was the eastern side of the Roman Empire, which is the Byzantine Empire, eventually called the Byzantine Empire, lasted for another, almost 1,000 years. And this will be covered in chapter 2. Now it's time for us to go to our review and assess questions. The first one, reading check. Why did Diocletian divide the empire in half? And then number 2, let's interpret the maps. In what ways was Rome's location similar to that of Constantinople? And for number 3, identify problems and solutions. What was Diocletian's plan for ruling the vast empire more efficiently or maybe effectively? Go ahead, open chapter 1, section 3, review and assess, and answer these questions in this Google slide.